Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Your Highness Sheikha Moza bint Nasser, Chairperson of Qatar Foundation, Excellencies and honorable guests. I'm Leila Al-Sheikhli, a principal presenter at Al Jazeera Media Network, and it is an honor to be your Master of Ceremonies today. I'm delighted to welcome you to the 17th World Congress of Bioethics, hosted by Hamad bin Khalifa University's Research Center for Islamic Legislation and Ethics at the College of Islamic Studies, in collaboration with the World Innovation Summit for Health. We would like to welcome our esteemed guests, a distinguished assembly of renowned scholars and health practitioners from around the world who endeavor to answer the moral and ethical questions that arise within the ever-evolving field of healthcare. It is now more than ever, as fundamental principles of bioethics are being compromised, we are bearing witness to the systematic targeting of healthcare institutions, professionals, and human lives, and the ongoing violations being committed against them. The World Congress of Bioethics is esteemed as the largest gathering of bioethicists globally, and this edition is distinctive in its location, theme, and setting. It is the first time the Congress is held in the Arab and Muslim world. By focusing on the underexplored intersections between religion, culture, and global bioethics, and advocating for broader support for scholars from previously underrepresented countries, we look to this Congress to stand as a hallmark of diversity, pluralism, and representation in the universal discourse of bioethics. Distinguished guests, it is my pleasure now to introduce Dr. Ahmed Hasna, the president of Hamad bin Khalifa University, who will deliver the opening remarks.
Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Good morning. Your Highness, Sheikha Moza bint Nasser, Chairperson of the Qatar Foundation, esteemed guests, it gives me a great honor and pleasure to welcome you to the 17th edition of the World Congress of Bioethics. It is important to highlight that the main challenge facing humanity has always been an ethical challenge, whether in science, medicine, AI, or global politics. We live in a very dynamic world. Ethical challenges are rising on multiple fronts and dimensions and are impacting humanity. No single point of view, philosophy, or approach should be the solo custodian of ethical discussions and policy formulation. A more comprehensive, multi-views discussion need to be adopted. We at Hamad bin Khalifa University believe that no voice needs to be left out And discussion around bioethics must have all voices around the table, and that different perspectives have equal rights. As such, we have worked hard to achieve more inclusive event, welcoming different voices and diverse approach beside the usual dominated perspective, in addition to providing opportunities for voices usually underrepresented from Asia, Africa, and South America. The support of the university made it possible for a sizable participation in this edition from those underprivileged countries. Esteemed guests, we are also delighted to report that the 17th edition marked a historical occasion, as its unfold unique feature that never materialized throughout more than 3 decades of the history of the Congress, as it is the first time to be held in the Arab world and the entire Middle East region, and to have adapted the unique theme, religion, culture, and global bioethics, striving to provide a platform for bioethical perspectives rooted in religions and culture traditions, often not being presented in previous editions. The role of religion is crucial in the biomedical area. Discussion shaping policy should not neglect people's beliefs, as they are part of their lives, and it is important to be captured in the policy formulation. It is also important to recognize that heavenly religions were revealed to provide guiding principles for humanity, irrespective of time and geographical places, providing an important basis for ethical discussion away from trial and error or time-bounded approaches. Ladies and gentlemen, we have a great wealth in Islamic civilization when it comes to ethics. We need to have our voice and knowledge in that area well represented on the global scene, and work with the global community to address the bioethical challenges. The leadership and vision of Her Highness Sheikha Moza on the important role of ethics in our current and future life have led to the creation of the first Research Center for Islamic Legislation and Ethics, CILE, in January 2012, a high-quality education and research hub. CILE is an integral part of that vision and plays an important role in leading the international platform in discussions and work related to Islamic ethics. And we at Hamad bin Khalifa University are committed to continue having CILE playing a leading role in the generation of knowledge in the domain of Islamic ethics across different disciplines, especially the area of bioethics, and impact local, regional, and global discussion. In supporting the development and advancing of Islamic bioethics knowledge and contribution, we are proud to announce the initiation of establishing and hosting of the International Islamic Bioethics Association at Hamad bin Khalifa University. Esteemed guests, I am sure that your discussion during this conference and your different perspective will lead into valuable recommendations in the bioethics field that could really set the basis for the future development in the biomedical field and support the humanity advancement. We have all the trust in you, and we wish you a very successful and productive conference. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Hasna, for your insightful remarks. And now, distinguished guests, it is time that we start a panel discussion titled Bridging Worlds and Intersecting Pathways: Religion, Culture, Diversity, and Global Bioethics, where we will explore in depth the themes of this year's World Congress of Bioethics. Please join me in welcoming our moderator and speakers to the stage, Dr. Mohammed Ghaly, the Congress Chair and Head of the Research Center for Islamic Legislation and Ethics, HBKU's College of Islamic Studies, Sultana Afdhal, CEO of the World Innovation Summit for Health and Congress Co-Chair, and Dr. Cesar Atuire, President of the International Association of Saeed Ismail, Acting President and Chief Scientific and Operations Officer of the Qatar Precision Health Institute, and Dr. Khalid Fakhro, Chief Research Officer and Director of the Precision Medicine Program of Sidra Medicine, and Dr. Julian Savulescu, Director Center of Biomedical Ethics at the National University of Singapore, Dr. Voo Teck Chuan, Communication Officer of the International Association of Bioethics. Welcome to the stage, and I wish you a very successful panel.
Your Highness, Your Excellencies and distinguished guests, الحضور الكريم معنا في القاعة وعبر الإنترنت. السلام عليكم جميعاً ورحمة الله تعالى وبركاته. It's my pleasure and honor to be moderating this special panel featuring key themes in this Congress, introducing something about the field itself, bioethics, the theme of this Congress, about religion, culture, and global bioethics, and the question of diversity. I prepared like 5-6 pages as introduction, but we will not go through all this now. I just want to say that as I always say to my students when I teach them Islamic bioethics, the relationship between science, especially cutting-edge scientific research, and we will see some of the colleagues who will bring a wealth of knowledge about this. So science, medicine, biomedical sciences on one hand, and the advances that happen at this front, and the way we think about the right and the wrong in our life, what actions we can take, what actions we cannot take. The relationship is very strong, and it develops by time. So in the past, we used to look at the body through what we now call the phenotype. We look at the body as a hardware thing, has the organs, we look at them, and then we try to read diseases like what the famous Muslim physician Ibn Sina, Avicenna, said, "Al-tibbu hifdhu sihhatin wa bur'u maradin," preserving the health that when it exists and restoring it when it is missing. By time, and this of course would create an imbalanced power relationship between the physician and the patient, and then ethics would get in order to put balance back to this relationship by putting more responsibility on the physician and more protection for the patient. And we had books in our Islamic civilization like Ishaq ibn Ali al-Ruhawi, Adab al-Tabib, Etiquettes of the Physician, Masalih al-Anfus wal-Abdan by Abu Zayd al-Balkhi, and others. But by time, this traditional, conventional look at the body changed radically. So we have here geneticists. We will say something about genetics. We see the body through the 3+ billion bases and letters, digits, data, datification of the human body. This changed the look because the amount of information, the bulk of information that we have access to became immense, and we had issues about the ethical management of this information, huge information. As Francis Collins wrote in his book, The Language of God, if we take these bases or letters, the DNA of the human being in every cell in the body, and we try to stretch it and make it a straight line, it would bring us to the sun and come back a couple of times, depending on the mathematical calculation. So we can imagine the number of information that we have, not only about health, but the so-called book of life. And now we are moving not only to reading this book, but even editing this book. And then we have the gene editing. What should we do? What we cannot do? These are all big questions, and this is what we call now bioethics. This is our field. Judging about how far we can go, what should be done, what shouldn't be done, is not only a matter of scientific possibility, what is doable in science, but what's acceptable in ethics. So we say to scientists always, you need to consult before going further. And in this, you have the moral world of people. Sometimes we have common morality, sometimes we have particular morality, we have shared values, sometimes local particular values, and so on. And this is the negotiation. The conference, the World Congress of Bioethics, is introduced as representing the World Congress of Bioethics. So normally all voices, etc. The critique from colleagues in the global south, like people working here, like myself and my colleagues in Qatar, we say that we were always underrepresented, duly underrepresented, and we want to be there. So having the Congress today in Qatar for the first time in the Arab Muslim world and the entire Middle East is, of course, a big step. So this is the bioethics, this is the Congress we have, and now we will start the discussion with my esteemed colleagues who bring a wealth of knowledge in their own fields, and we will see how far we can go. So I will start with Mrs. Sultana Afdhal, the CEO of WISH, the co-host of this Congress. And I say to you, when I approached WISH and I say that we want to submit a proposal for hosting the World Congress of Bioethics, I didn't see surprisingly much hesitation. So directly I said, okay, we do it. In a couple of days, I got the approval, we started the proposal, and then we started the journey that brings us here today. WISH is working at the international level also. You bring people always in the summits from all over the world, and you work also on the local. Why didn't you hesitate about going this journey despite the expected difficulties going through this? How does this fit in the work of WISH, getting in touch with international, taking care of the local and the religious values rooted in our Islamic tradition and so on?
Thank you, Dr. Ghaly.
You're welcome.
So this Bioethics Congress, it feels like a continuation of work we already do at WISH. For those of you who don't know us, every summit we do have a report that looks at a pressing global healthcare challenge, but from an Islamic ethical perspective. And so the expansion of that work this is a natural fit for that. So that report, I'm just going to step back before I answer your question properly, to what we do and how this intersects with what you do. So, you know, we engage with the community, particularly the scientific community, when we start to create these research reports. I think that we, in this sense, compared to other global summits, really do occupy a bit of a niche. People often wonder why it is that we look at global healthcare challenges through this prism of religion. The answer is really, really clear for us. Even if you're a healthcare practitioner or a scientist, wherever you work within this field, you cannot get away from the fact that almost 24% of the world are Muslims. That equates to almost 1.8 billion people, and they exist in every sphere. So whatever your religious perspective is, understanding their perspective and how they look at how their religion influences their decisions is a really key area of work. This, I think, again, going back to your original question, is why this intersects with the work that we do. So bridging that gap between the community, the scientific community, and our civil society was really important. I think this is a really good message for us, that this Congress is being held in this country, and it's an ever-increasing acceptance of the role of faith in this field, and to forget that role, I think, is very remiss. Have I answered?
Thank you so much. No, thank you so much. I also have to say that this is also one of the fruits of the more than a decade collaboration. Wish always opened the door for Kyle to speak about Islam in the summit and so on. And through this, you build networks and you see the people. Yeah, so this is also
I was going to add, actually, we find it really surprising that when we do go, people that come to our summits, and the people that attend the Islamic bioethical topics are usually not just Muslims. It's increasingly people from the West who want a greater understanding of where we sit within this field and how Islam or other religions, or the three monotheistic religions, influence that field.
Thank you so much. Now to Dr. Caesar and Dr. TC. You are now representing the International Association of Bioethics, who made the decision to accept the proposal that we submitted. As has been discussed yesterday, this is an important milestone in the history of the IEB. So I ask both of you, how do you see this happening now, that the first time in the Arab world and the Middle East, the decision, the background behind, the philosophy behind? Many of the colleagues ask, is this the exception to the rule? So, okay, now we go beyond the normal gravity of bioethics in Western Europe and the US, and then we go back there? Or this is the beginning of a new rule, that different voices now will be represented and things will change. So how do you see the step that we have now in relation to the history of the IEB, and how do you see moving forward?
Thank you, Mohammed.
Welcome, thank you.
The IAB has a very competent communications officer, so I think I'll leave the details of the journey of the IAB for TC, my colleague here, to answer. But just to set the framing, your question is this just, an anomaly, or is it part of a journey? And I think it is part of a journey. Here we are today. The president of the IAB is an African. Our communications officer is an Asian. And we're holding the Congress in the Middle East. This is part of the journey. And this journey can only grow to become more and more inclusive. But with regard to the topic of what we're trying to discuss, what I often see when I think about religion and bioethics is, if we took another perspective on our moral lives, all people live in moral environments. Today, we're very concerned about our physical environment, but we also need to be concerned about our moral environment. Now, the moral environment relies on various sources. So if we ask ourselves individually, what is it, or what sources do we draw on to be able to make our moral evaluations? We draw from our families, we draw from our religion, we draw from the societies in which we live. We draw from multiple sources. And in that sense, for many people in the world today, religion is an important source of their moral values. And therefore, if we are engaging in ethics and in bioethics, religion as one of the sources that people draw on for their moral commitments and moral choices has an important role, and we need to engage with this seriously. The second point I would like to make before leaving the word for our communications officer, TC, is this. Those of us perhaps who belong to communities that are traditionally called marginalized or not the mainstream, yes, we have, for example, we talk about African bioethics. you can talk about Islamic bioethics, which I think is an important thing. At the same time, too, we need to make a careful distinction. Is Islamic bioethics only for Muslims, or is it for the world? Just like I will ask myself, is African bioethics for Africans, or is a contribution to the world? And I think the mission of an Islamic tradition in bioethics is to go beyond just doing bioethics for people of Islamic faith, but to say, how can the thinking and the values that have emerged through this experience of Islamic thinking around bioethics, how could this contribute to a global discourse that will make us more inclusive and perhaps shed new lights on things that we have not noticed up until now? And so with this, I'll pass over to TC.
Thank you so much. You raised very important points, which will make you an important guest in the future in our discussions. Yes. So we will have about Islamic bioethics, and we will have a very good discussion with these thoughts. Yes, thank you so much. Yes.
Yeah, just to add on to Caesar's point and answers to your question on whether this is an exceptional turn, I think some people actually took it to be exceptional, but in my view, I think it's not exceptional because bioethics has always been an inclusive field of scholarly inquiry or dialogue, right? We are informed by various disciplines, including theology, cultural, anthropological understandings of morality and so forth. And in fact, this used to take center stage. It used to be part of the mainstream of bioethics scholarly output. But I think in recent years, it's been more sidelined because of the push towards global bioethics. So in order for bioethics to be global, it has to be content thin. You know, you have to propose a set of principles and values that everyone can endorse, right? You can speak across cultures. But in order for it to be action guiding, right? And Caesar said we draw on different resources, including culture and our own religion. It has to be content thick, right? And this is where you talk about the difference between common moralities and particular moralities. It has to be informed by particular moralities. So in terms of practical things, as a board, we have to decide as a group. And we also have to be informed by our stakeholders, IAB members, or anyone who's interested in bioethics. And so we have to take that kind of a process to what more can we do to encourage conversations on religion and culture. We have to take note that, you know, conference themes, individual presentation topics are the choices of conference organizers and presenters. But the IAB can organize explicit panels or webinars in between conferences to encourage such conversations. But as I say, it's a process that we need to engage with our IAB members.
Thank you so much. Now we finished the institutional part. Now we go to the more controversial part. Yes, the people who are doing the science and later also the bioethics, especially genetics. Dr. Said, you have been assuming leadership in the work of Qatar on genomics, Qatar Genome Program, also Qatar Biobank, now Qatar Precision Health Institute. I have to say myself, when I arrived here in 2013, the first call I got was from Qatar Genome Program, asking me what should we say about this thing. So from the beginning, you had to do with the people in religious studies, specifically Islamic studies, telling you about what is right and what is wrong, etc. We had sometimes a heated discussion about the return of results and so on. We could sort it out. We had publications about this. So you work for Qatar. It's a world-class scientific research, cutting edge. You deal with international partners, but you also care about the values of the people here in the country, in the region, and in the Muslim world. How do you make this combination, doing cutting edge scientific research, taking care of the religious values? Are we not making your life difficult? How do you see this? Yes.
Thank you very much. I'll start from what Caesar mentioned, is that Islamic bioethics could go beyond the Muslim world, definitely. And the example that you and I worked over the years on is a perfect example where, yes, others can learn from what we do here. So, and what happens in Qatar is very interesting. If you talk about the whole Islamic world, it's because science here is at the edge, and we have bioethicists like you guys around. This is where this interaction can happen and result in very interesting thoughts. So I'll give this one very important example, and actually it was a very small chat that I had with Dr. Ghaly, and I think it was at QNCC at the side of one of those conferences happening here, and when he was asking me about what we do at the Qatar Genome Project, and I was enthusiastically telling him that we have the whole genome for each participant. It's like an open book for us. And then for him said, well, so you know everything about him? I said, yes. And then the question came that if I fast forward now, became our biggest project in the next 5 years, which is return of actionable results, a huge national scale prevention program. The chat was around, so would you tell your participants about what they have in their genomes? And I said, no, because it's a research project and our consent that they've signed doesn't oblige us to return results to them. And then here came the surprise where Dr. Ghaly said, if it's actionable, if it's life-threatening, I really don't care about your consent. You have to tell him. And then he gives me that example and leaves, which is if you're worshiping in a prayer and then you see someone sinking next to you, you have to cut. You have to. It's not just that you better. You have to cut whatever you're doing, and then you go and save his life. So that stayed with me, and although we were very busy in those years establishing a program, collecting samples, doing genomes, working with researchers, it stayed with me. And then I was talking to our dear clinicians. We call them the clinical champions. We can't cross the bridge from research to clinical implementation unless you have committed clinicians. And then I bumped into Dr. Salha and Abu Jassoum from the cancer center here, and she says, yes, if you have patients, for example, carrying BRCA1, BRCA2 mutations, I'm willing to receive them. So we thought, why don't we do this pilot where we identify those carrying this potentially fatal mutation, identify them, counsel them, refer them to the healthcare pathways. It sounds easy, straightforward, but if you think of this example, it is, yes, but if you think of the hundreds or thousands of different mutations carried by tens of thousands of participants causing dozens of different diseases, you are basically going to be overwhelming the healthcare system. But the healthcare system here in Qatar, and this is the beauty of what's happening in Qatar, everybody knows everyone, was willing to do that. So that pilot just finished very recently. We were able indeed to identify families who are carrying these mutations, predisposing them to early onset of breast cancer. And literally we saved lives of those ladies and their relatives. And now we are in the process of expanding that to all ACMG, American College of Medical Genetics. All the hundreds and hundreds of different variants and mutations will be identified, those people carrying it. We created a pathway, and that's the most important part. So we know exactly what to do when we call them. And then when we get the first counseling by the first frontline genetic counselor, he will tell them that you need another sample to confirm something. And then that confirmatory test will confirm if they have it or not. And then they receive another round of counseling, and then they are referred to the right pathway within the healthcare system. This is going to be, inshallah, one of the largest prevention programs ever. You are referring a large number of people carrying a huge number of variants. So this all started from a conversation with an Islamic bioethicist, but when I ever go and talk to colleagues in the business of large-scale genome project, they find that very interesting, and they find that this is something we can learn from your experience, guys. And for us as scientists, العقد شريعة المتعاقدين, the law is the contract, is the consent. So we abide by the consent that each participant signs, and it's always beyond us that there are some ethical considerations that can override this consent. that we take religiously as scientists. And that conversation, whenever I have with colleagues around the world, I find very interesting.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Dr. Khalid Fakhro, like Dr. Saeed, we see each other a lot the last time, not because you are too busy, I'm also, but I always enjoy the discussion with the geneticists and scientists because my background is in Islamic studies, not in science, so I need to learn a lot, make up things that I missed. So I remember very well a discussion between us, and you told me something, and it was like straightforward, but I was completely shocked. You told me if you ask an average geneticist, will tell you everything is genetic. Some are more genetic, others are not, but everything is genetic. And then I told you, oh, no, but no, in Islam, this is quite problematic because this can fall into the trap of genetic determinism, genetic reductionism. It's about human nature. Are we anything except our genes? Human nature is much more sophisticated than this, etc., etc. So now I would like to have also the audience with us here and online to share with us, continue this discussion. And tell us, so do geneticists, whether they are in the Arab world or somewhere else, Muslims or not, is this really something common among the geneticists, so including also Dr. Saeed, for instance? How do you see this?
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. I'd like to thank you, first of all, for the kind invitation to Kyle, to Wish, and to the IAB. It's an honor to bring a scientist here and to talk about some of the science that we do. And so what I say that all traits are genetic, but some are more genetic than others. So I think the way that we look at it is really through this lens of what was the exploding lens of genome sciences. As many of you know, genomics has really taken the world by storm. The ability to sequence the genome has now become commoditized. Anyone can get their genome sequenced. The work that Qatar Genome has done, for example, for the country has been trailblazing on an international scale. And we've seen many similar genomic programs take place around the world. Now, the way we think about it as geneticists is we look at genes and we look at mutations in genes. And the technical word is variant, but I think the audience will be more familiar with mutation. So I'm going to use the wrong terminology now. I'm going to say mutation. What I mean is a variant. And when we look at a mutation in your gene, the way the geneticists think about mutations is by something called the effect size. And the effect size of a mutation means if I have this mutation, am I going to get disease? And if it's 1-to-1, like with sickle cell, with cystic fibrosis, we say that's an effect size of 1. You have that mutation, and 100% of carriers of the mutation will get the disease. But there's a lot of other conditions where the effect size is very small. It's 0.1 or 0.05. So there's only a 10%, a 5% risk of getting that disease. And so as this genomic technology was exploding, everyone, at least on the clinical side, wanted to get their patients sequenced. You talk to a patient, when you talk to a physician, they say, oh, look, I have this disease, I have that disease. Can we get a whole genome? Can we get a whole genome? And what I was trying to explain, and this is something that I also explain to my students and trainees around our lab, is that not everything can be solved with a genome. Genetics is, today, with our current knowledge, is very, very well attuned to things with large effect sizes. Those we can pick out very quickly and very easily, and that's why, particularly in patients with, let's say, rare diseases, patients with very early onset disease, patients with very severe disease, things that are on the extremes of phenotypes, we can pick out very well with a genome, because there's going to be probably one mutation that's really causing you to be on that extreme. And in that sense, I think Qatar and other Middle Eastern countries, I know there's many representatives here from Middle Eastern countries, we've really been at the forefront of gene discovery in that sense, is discovering these genes that have these big effect sizes. But for small effect sizes, you're not going to discover them in small families. You need big, big cohorts. And this is where there's this constant interplay between scientists who do work on rare disease families, the nuclear families, and then national programs that do work on the general population. And those two things come from both ends, and they meet in the middle, because it's really through those large national efforts that we will discover these mutations that cause a smaller effect, but it's still a meaningful effect. And so by a new statistical method, something called the polygenic risk score today, you can add those small effects, and surprisingly, some of them do add up to a very large effect. And we've seen that with cardiovascular disease, with hypercholesterolemia, with conditions like that. So the idea from an ethical point of view is as science develops faster, we will have a lot more data at our hands. And the question is, what do we do with the data? And I think the beauty of bioethics, and I always thought that bioethics was a discipline that was there to just philosophers limiting our ability to do things. When in fact, what I realized was it was really people with the ability and the knowledge to help anticipate things that we will face in the future. And through those discussions, when we were having these discussions before anyone was publishing on this stuff, I still remember when you first came here. And it's really through these interactions where the bioethicists talk to scientists that we can start anticipating these problems, start anticipating the questions that they might develop, and then start implementing them at scale.
Thank you so much. Dr. Julian Savulescu, you are one of the few, if not the most important one, who wrote about these things related to genetics and ethics, gen ethics. I want to go beyond the issue of genetics and its relation to diseases, but beyond that. With the introduction of genetics and the so-called genetic or genomic revolution, we started to have big things about it. We have a book, Gene of God, arguing that people who are believers are not believers because of a gene in them. We have even big scientists like James Watson and others who some of their statements feature ideas related to genetic determinism, that we don't have a free will. Our genes dictate how we are going. What is your perspective about this? I know you are working now on a study or a project. We talked about the polygenic score. Is this the right term? Yeah. So how can you tell us that genetics beyond the issue of disease and treatment and so on, and how people and ethicists in general would make any distinction between these? Using genetics only for treatment, or using genetics for enhancing our human nature beyond even the issue of sickness and health?
Yeah, thank you. And thank you, Your Royal Highness and Dr. Ghaly, for the opportunity to be here. Just building on what was said, everything is in a sense genetic, not just the diseases that we will suffer from, but our talents, our limitations, our tastes, our personality. Now, these are not determined, but in general, they're 50% genetic. So there is a significant genetic contribution, as any parent will know by observing their children. And there is the opportunity not only to intervene in selection of children that have less chance of disease, but selection of children who will have a higher probability of having a higher intelligence, or less antisocial personality, or even religiosity has a genetic contribution. And of course there is gene editing, which has already been attempted in China, and that was for enhancement purposes. It wasn't for the treatment of the disease, it was to try to create a resistance or an immunity to HIV. Now, if there was a vaccine to prevent HIV, everyone would be coming forward to have it. The reason there was so much reaction to that experiment was because there are risks at the moment from using gene editing of embryos to bring about immunity to HIV. And actually the problem in that research was not the gene editing, it was the bad ethical thinking. So 20 years ago, I wrote in my first editorial for the Journal of Medical Ethics, if you're going to do this was at the time of a young man who was 18 who died in a gene therapy experiment. And I argued there in that paper that trial should have been done not on an adult with a mild version of this genetic condition who could consent, but on embryos with a more severe version who die in the first year of life, because they have nothing to lose and something to gain, and he has a lot to lose and nothing really to gain. And so this was an overvaluing of consent, as Dr. Saeed was discussing in relationship to his return of results case. An overvaluing of one value that many bioethicists, and in fact the World Medical Association states you should do research on adults who can consent, not incompetent patients. But I argued that we should try to minimise the expected harm 20 years ago by using embryos with lethal conditions. So in this case, if He Jiankui, the Chinese biophysicist, had actually asked my advice, I would have said, yeah, you can do that research, but take an embryo with Tay-Sachs disease, or take an embryo with a lethal condition where you have some possibility of benefiting and nothing to lose, because essentially the embryo will die. And so when people call for a translational pathway to gene editing, a translational pathway needs clear ethical thinking. And that was what was lacking in this sort of catastrophic experiment. It wasn't that gene editing itself was unethical, it was the way in which it was conducted, the way in which that experiment was done.
Thank you so much. Just before going back to the questions, we had a discussion about religiosity and genetics now. How far we are that we can make people more religious through genetics? Any idea? No, Julian, I'm asking Julian. I'm asking you.
These are the geneticists.
No.
I remember 20 years ago, there was a famous geneticist who retired, and he said, based on twin studies, identical twin studies, the finding that he never published was that religiosity was highly genetic on identical twin studies. Now, there are problems with identical twin studies. I don't know what polygenic risk scores there are for religiosity. But I think every characteristic about us, how skeptical we are, how faithful we are, I can tell you that infidelity is genetic, partly. That I do know. The AVPR1A mutation is associated in some people with high levels of infidelity. So it's surprising that a lot of our behaviour has some genetic. That's not to say it's determined. We still have a choice, we still have the environment, but it can be harder for some people to be faithful than others.
Thank you. I would like, normally speaking, I shouldn't speak, I just run the show, but this is so tempting. So I will use my role as a panelist now, if you allow me. The issue of, this is part of the discussion, as you know, in bioethics about moral enhancement. Making people better, not necessarily in the health condition, but in their ethics and morality. So why not we can make people more inclined to telling the truth, not telling lies, etc. And then comes the issue of religiosity. This needs a lot of discussion. We need to have research seminars about these issues. But I would say, as someone with the Islamic background and my specialization in Islamic bioethics, I see the concept, the Islamic concept of taklif, religious accountability before God. You have your acts become divided into a scale, the good, the bad, the hasanat and sayyat, as we call it. The issue is the process, the journey that brings you to. So it is not about telling the truth at this moment, but striving and trying to overcome any wishes or desires that are not in alignment with your moral world, and you try to be upright and do the right thing as you believe. This is the process that's important. The risk of this genetic moral enhancement is that you cut this process short. So one would wonder who would have the good act on the scale, the one who did the gene editing or the one who's telling the truth. It's not only the possibility that science can do that, but also people's moral world, and I'm speaking now as a Muslim bioethicist, how these things would look like. Of course, and I have children at home. It's always much easier if you can tame them through genetic editing so that they will be well-behaved, listening to the father. And it's nice. It is not bad, and I think many, especially the young ones, are always more difficult to manage. But it is again, not only a scientific issue, but an ethical one, and again, related to people's values and so on. Okay, so now we do other questions. Now we are free. We discussed what we wanted to discuss in the beginning. I would like to start with Sultana, and do you have any lessons to share with the audience about what we have been through, not only through the preparations for this Congress, but the work that has been done also in collaboration with WISH, especially related to what Cesar was saying about the Islamic bioethics and engagement with the world. So you said that the audience was from outside, the people come from outside Qatar, were quite interested in the religious aspects, particularly Islamic. So it seems there are lessons to learn from and to share for the future in this regard.
Thank you for the question. Yes. Yeah, I did mention that at the summit it surprised us somewhat that a lot of the audience were not the typical audience that you would expect. So your question really looks at bridging the gap. So in terms of bridging the gap within the community, I'm going to focus on that because I know we have a lot of scientists here and they can answer this question from that perspective. So I don't know if you remember, a couple of years ago we did a day seminar talking about dementia from an ethical perspective, Islamic perspective. And for those of you who know about our religion, we place a huge amount of emphasis on respecting our parents and taking care of them. So the idea of the diagnosis of dementia, which is hugely stigmatized not only here, but around the world, is something that people take a lot of discomfort in. That results sometimes in the denial of treatment, diagnosis, further stigmatization by the carer themselves. And so our seminar that day was really focused on looking at it from a different perspective. So how do you change the perspective within the prism of a person's religion and look at it as, actually, if you do cherish your parents and you care about them, the denial of that treatment is actually a neglect of care. And I know that I called upon you a couple of months ago. We had the same issue. It was an ethical issue about the end-of-life care. And so that's where I think that we still try to plug that gap in within the community. From an international perspective, beyond the summit, we, in 2019, had an event at the Vatican, again talking about end-of-life care from the three monotheistic religions and mental health, and looking at actually the commonalities. You were there again, Dr. Ghaly, as you always are with us and Kyle, because your perspective and your prism is actually, the expertise does lend a lot to our expanding of that dissemination of knowledge. So the topics that we choose sometimes really do pick up on those ethical issues that are most prevalent within our community, but also within the wider community. So from a local perspective, we do try to have those awareness campaigns beyond the summit to create the awareness. I always think that it's interesting, we talk about, we're on a quite high level talking about these issues, but at the end of the day, they have to filter down to civil society. And how do you convince civil society of the work that you're doing? How is it applicable to them? And that's always where we try to plug that gap to shape the policy, but also permeate into civil society.
Thank you. Dr. Cesar, we had this Congress with the title or the theme, Religion, Culture, and Global Bioethics, to say that global bioethical discourse needs religion. And we didn't have this theme since the beginning of the World Congress of Bioethics. This is one of the distinctive issues in this issue. As you know, modern bioethics was quite, I don't want to say, trying to take distance, try to be in the name of neutrality, empowering the patient, etc. We don't talk about religion, and religion shouldn't be part of the talk. In your talk yesterday, you said that this can be counterproductive. So when the patient and also the physician, of course, the society at large, religion is important. And in the name of neutrality, I say no religion, no discussion of the religion. This is not bioethical, this is not liberal. It will be a problem. Imposing on the people my own moral world, although they think differently. But also you say that religion also should engage with this. And I really like the idea. Because that's why we made the World Congress. We could make it internally and discuss these issues and not bringing people from outside or the World Congress. So I want to get your insights about this. On one hand, we want to have a global bioethical discourse, and we tried all the time throughout these decades not to bring religion. And now we say, yes, we can bring religion, but religion should also engage with the secular and other. How do you see this? Especially now you have a 2-year term at the IAB, International Association of Bioethics. How do you see this getting in the future? This interplay, religious, secular, global bioethical discourse.
Well, thank you. We could have this conversation for the whole day. But since we don't have time, I'll try and make it as brief as possible. Yesterday, I spoke about pluriversality. You see, one of the antitheses of pluriversality is dogmatism. And dogmatism is when we take a position, we harden ourselves on that position, and then we are no longer willing to listen or to engage with other people. Now, dogmatism can occur on the part of religious people, just as it can occur on the part of secular people, when we decide that this is our position and we are no longer willing to engage in dialogue. And we need to go beyond the dogmatic approaches, which is why we need to engage on both sides. Secondly, the idea of actually trying to understand other people does not necessarily mean agree with them. And this is important, and as Sultana mentioned, I mean, even when religious groups get together, she said, I mean, interreligious groups, it's not that they agree in their faiths, but the important thing is to try to understand and look at things from the other person's viewpoints, and that is how we engage. And so, coming back to, you know, the context of, I mean, ethics, yesterday I mentioned the patient-centered context. I'll give you a very concrete example from my part of the world to illustrate this. People living with certain mental health issues understand their condition not only as a psychiatric condition, but they also believe that there is something spiritual to this condition that they have. Now, when you try to handle them clinically by teaching them to manage that situation, they will also be looking for a way to eliminate the condition. And so what then tends to happen is that people will go on the one hand to the psychiatric care to look for the drugs that help them to manage the condition, and then go somewhere else to look for somebody to pray for them so that the condition will be eliminated. And then you get a situation of what we sometimes call healer shopping. Now, if as a community of healers, we don't dialogue with each other, we can actually do harm to people. And that is why it is important to engage with the way people perceive the conditions that they actually hold. And I think that is, I mean, these are part of the conversations that we need to have. And yes, it is true that we haven't yet established the grammar of being able to dialogue in this way. We need to learn, and this is why I think having a more sort of like inclusive way of doing bioethics is important. But because remember, you know, the history of secularism is linked to the religious history of Europe and the West. Other parts of the world also have religion, but have evolved in different ways. I mean, if we think about places like Japan, where, I mean, culture, religion, and modernity have evolved in a different way, learning from the various experiences around the world will help us to be able to engage in this dialogue. And that way we can be sure that we are actually taking seriously the lived experience of the people that we're trying to engage with in healthcare, in research, and in all that we do. But yeah, I could go on forever. I think I'll stop here. Thank you.
Yeah, so my point, and Dr. TC maybe can answer this one. So how you see the IEB engaging with these questions in the future? You think of specific initiatives, creating specific arms for the IEB, trying to involve these different voices. We don't want to say where is the next World Congress. Yeah, we will see this. The surprise will be on Thursday. So how do you see the ideas mentioned by Caesar translated into initiatives, projects? Do you see the need that these things should result in specific structural changes in the IEB?
Yeah, so the IEB's main activity is the conference, right? The World Congress. And we are thinking as a board as to how to expand our activities and our impact in a variety of ways. As I mentioned, I think one of the things we could do is to organize in-between conference events. So things like webinars or even workshops looking at all these issues. I think the question is really why? What we as an organization or association have a duty to prevent or to encourage. And I think it has to do with the fact that we have to take note that a lot of attention and focus tends to be driven by what is sexy to do, right? Whether in terms of advancing your career, so you need to look at niche areas, or whether you need to get funding and so forth to get yourself. So that's why, there's always this transition. In the past, when I first started out in bioethics, the focus was on organ transplantation, IVF, and now it's on gene editing, AI, and so forth. So people are always moving around. But, you don't want to avoid the so-called 10-90 gap, even in terms of bioethics resources. You don't want to avoid a situation where only 10% of bioethicists are working on problems that affect 90% of the world. Right, so you want to avoid the kind of situation, and that's the kind of dialogue we want to look at. Problems that afflict day-to-day decision-making for patients facing death, what is suffering for them, for policymakers who need to make decisions during emergencies, for example. And again, voices of the marginalized could be involved. I seldom see a patient, speaking as an actual presenter at these sort of events, and it's something that's now being encouraged even by the World Health Organization. Perhaps something that perhaps it's also something we could do at future WCBs.
Thank you. I will change the order and go to Julian, and then I come back to you. Julian, in one of your famous articles, you have many famous articles, but one of them published 2015 in the Journal of Medical Ethics, you criticized the field. And you said that the field is gradually turning into dogma. There is no philosophy. It's the scientification of the bioethics. We are just doing empirical studies, not knowing where this will lead us, and not answering the question, what should we do, and so on. This was back in 2015. Do you see the field is getting better, the same? Do we suffer the same problems? How do you see the field of bioethics now? What is needed? How can it be improved? I know this is a very big question, and we have.
I'll try and be very brief.
So I
think two things have happened since 2015. First of all, we had the pandemic, and unfortunately, the pandemic was a terrible example of scientification. So we had leaders saying, "We're just following the science. Science can't tell you where to go. It can tell you how to go or what the possibilities are, but it can't tell you where you should go." And so the only outcome that was used to drive policy were a number of COVID deaths. Not all deaths, not socioeconomic welfare, not mental health, COVID deaths. And so this was a very narrow outcome. So I think we saw really the absence of real ethics informing policy in the pandemic. There was no real attempt to value lives, and decide which lives should we give priority to. There was simply, we want to minimize the number of deaths from COVID. And secondly, how do we balance freedom versus health? So in my view, the pandemic showed the absence of real ethics. The second movement since 2015 has been the exponential rise of what's sometimes called wokeism or critical race theory, or, as you put it, equality, diversity, and inclusion. But inclusion doesn't mean including Muslims or Asians. As you know, as you realise, we have a lot of people boycotting the conference here on grounds of their view of what the right thing is. So what we've seen since 2015 is a reduction in academic freedom, an increase in censorship, and you're the victims essentially of censorship. I had a paper, I wrote early on in the pandemic a paper on selective lockdown of the elderly, saying that it could be ethically justified to only restrict the freedom of those over a certain age. And I was invited to take part on a modelling paper that modelled the effects of only locking down people over the age of 50 or 60. And so this was requested by Nature Communications in May 2020, and it passed peer review. But one of the reviewers said, you should recognise the social implications of publishing this paper, because this was at a time when the message was, we're all in this together, no one is safe until everyone is safe, stay home, protect the NHS, save lives, all of these dogmas. And the editors, even though it passed peer review, because it showed that you could achieve herd immunity with a very tolerable mortality, the editors said, no, we've decided not to publish it. That's the level of censorship that we have today. And there's a journal now, a Journal of Controversial Ideas, that has been created in order to enable people to publish ideas that you can't publish elsewhere. So unfortunately, I'm sorry to say that it's got worse. There are still people who are interested in philosophical bioethics. I had a paper that's just come out in the American Journal of Bioethics on the ethics of reproduction, comparing gene editing to genetic selection. It argues in favour of gene editing, not genetic selection. Now, one of the reviewers said this is too philosophical. You shouldn't publish it, no one will understand it. There are 20 commentaries on it. Obviously, there is still an appetite for philosophy, and I think that's where we can share things with Islam, a focus more on philosophy rather than censorship.
Thank you so much. Unfortunately, time is up. I would have liked to give you a few seconds, Khalid and Saeed, to say a few things about your impressions. If you want to add any concluding remarks, you are the hosts here in Qatar. You are the scientists leading what's happening. So please, the floor is yours.
Very quickly, I want just the non-scientists here I don't want them to go out with the idea that genetics is everything, and genetics, especially with behavior and other things. Even in our physical traits, there are genetic predispositions that we can play with. The way we behave, the way we act, the way we interact is not something we as geneticists have killed and proved. We are busy doing other things, but from the little I know, the genetic influences are minimal. So nature here is second to nurture. Even with physical traits, even with physical traits, you can still do things about. I just received my own report a couple of days ago. I've done my own genetics. I'm supposed to have more weight. I've managed to do that. I'm less likely to have thick hair. I couldn't do anything on that. So genetic determinism is not a fact that we have to walk away with.
Thank you. Khalid?
Thanks. I realize we're short on time. I was just going to add a couple of quick points. Number one is we were talking about effect size earlier. And so for genes with large effect with big mutations, those are the ones where I think genome editing is going to be at the forefront. So conditions like sickle cell, cystic fibrosis, those kinds of diseases. And it's our moral obligation as a community to make that possible for patients who suffer from this. On the more complex conditions, I think the discussion will keep going and will be very rich and lively with the bioethicists in the community. But just a shout out to people from this part of the world, we have a moral obligation to the rest of the world to create and publish and disseminate as much science as we can on our populations. There's people with Arab ancestry, MENA ancestry, North African, South Asian ancestry, living all over the world. Since God has endowed us with the resources to build such beautiful infrastructure and to attract such good scientists, it really is our moral obligation to make sure we share all of this with the rest of the world.
Thank you so much. Thanks, everyone. Thanks for the in-person and online attendance. And we will continue our discussions after the coffee break. I just would like you to stay for a while until I tell you we can move. So please stay with us. Thank you very much. Thank you, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Ghaly, and thank you, distinguished speakers. It was really interesting listening to you, and it emphasized the significance of examining bioethics through diverse traditions and various traditions. And it gives us a taste of what's coming the next days, of importance of engaging with scholars and researchers from such diverse backgrounds, cultures, communities, and faiths. As Dr. Ghaly said, we invite you all to a coffee break in the Spider Room and to many more discussions of this like. So please, I wish you a very, very successful Congress, fruitful and interesting debates. Thank you all for coming. Thank you.